Section 4 of The Age of Anne by Edward Ellis Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 4. The Grand Alliance. The Grand Alliance being duly formed, it will be well to consider its component parts. At its head we must place the Emperor, rather on account of the ancient dignity of the empire than because of its actual power. The office was still nominally elective. At each vacancy the electors met at Frankfurt on Main, and all the forms of an election were gone through. Sometimes there was a show of opposition, but the empire had now become practically hereditary in the House of Habsburg. For nearly 3 centuries no emperor had been elected who did not belong to that family. Though the empire gave dignity to the family, it did not give them power. Whatever they had of power came to them from their proper hereditary dominions, which were very heterogeneous. They were kings, and nominally elective, in Bohemia and in Hungary, archdukes in Austria and in the Tyrol. The family was by no means incapable, but was selfish and unable to rise to the conception of a union of Germany. Earlier the princes of this house had been bigoted Roman Catholics, who indeed had brought about the 30 Years' War by this very bigotry. But now the danger of encroachment on the part of France was great, and they were ready to join and take advantage of the alliance, although its members were chiefly Protestant. Louis XIV was declared hereditary foe of the Holy Empire. Leopold I was the emperor at the outbreak of the war, having been emperor for nearly 50 years. Shortly after the commencement, in the year after Blenheim, he died, and was succeeded by his eldest son Joseph, who had won some fame as a soldier, and who was much beloved in his own dominions, being generous and humane. Leopold's second son Charles was the candidate whom the allies wished to place upon the throne of Spain. He was by no means equal to his brother in merit. As the form of election to the empire was still kept up, we should notice who were the electors. By the 12th century the number had been fixed at 7, 3 of whom were ecclesiastics, the Archbishop of Mayence, Treves, and Cologne, and 4 lay princes, the electors of Saxony, Brandenburg, Bohemia, and the Palatinate. In the 17th century an 8th elector was added, Frederick, the Elector Palatine, son-in-law of James I of England, having given his consent to be elected as a Protestant to the kingdom of Bohemia, was defeated by the Austrian prince, who was also emperor, and was deprived not only of Bohemia, but also of the Palatinate, and therewith of his vote, which was given to the Catholic Duke of Bavaria. The 30 Years' War followed, and at the Peace of Westphalia, which ended that war, it was contended that the vote could not thus be taken from the Elector Palatine. At length, to satisfy both parties, a vote was given to each. In 1692, the Emperor Leopold, on his own responsibility, gave a 9th vote to the Duke of Hanover, whose descendant now sits upon the throne of England, though this vote was not recognized by the Diet of the Empire for 14 years, that is, after the outbreak of this war. The recognition was claimed by Hanover as its price for continuance in the war. Of the 9 electors, 2, Cologne and Bavaria, were upon the side of France. The other 2 ecclesiastics, Mayence and Treves, were neutral. Bohemia formed part of the emperor's dominions. The Elector of Saxony had recently been elected King of Poland, and was very busy at the eastern end of Germany. He could not spare energies for fighting against France. Brandenburg, the Palatinate, and Hanover were members of the Grand Alliance. When we remember what the Palatinate had lately suffered, we cannot wonder that it should join against France. Frederick, the Elector of Brandenburg, named as his price for joining the alliance that his electorate should be made into a kingdom. He was the last of the 12 Hohenzollern electors of Brandenburg, and had been wishing for some time to be king, especially since his neighbour, the Elector of Saxony, had become King of Poland, and another neighbour, the Duke of Hanover, had been made Elector with the prospect of his family inheriting the English crown. He took his regal title from another part of his dominions, and when the Emperor Leopold yielded, his ministry, it is said, having been richly bribed, Frederick was crowned King of Prussia in 1701. It may be well to remember that this was the grandfather of Frederick the Great, and that this was the beginning of the kingdom, though its earlier history before it was a kingdom is well worth study, which in our own day has extended and prospered until its monarch has become the new Emperor of Germany. Some other minor princes of Germany joined in the league, such as Louis, Prince of Baden, and for at least part of the war Denmark also contributed troops. But after all allowance has been made, England and Holland must be considered the central powers of the alliance. The names Holland and Dutch are instances of two different laws that affect names, extension and contraction. The word Dutch in England is only applied to the people and language of Holland, but it is the same as the name by which the Germans, of whom the natives of Holland are a branch, call themselves in their speech. The name Holland, properly applied to 2 out of the 7 united provinces, North and South Holland, has been extended to the whole 7. Holland, when the war broke out, had been a nation for rather more than 120 years. These 7 provinces, lying round and to the north of the mouth of the Rhine, had, together with the remaining provinces of the Netherlands, rebelled against the tyranny and persecution of Spain, and under the lead of William the Silent, Prince of Orange, great-grandfather of William III of England, the northern 7 had, after vigorous and heroic resistance, gained their independence. They banded themselves together in the League of Utrecht, 1579, into the federal commonwealth of the 7 united provinces. From the time of their freedom they made great progress. Daring mariners, eager and skilful traders, active colonists in the course of a century, they raised their small state to a high rank in Europe. It was for its size far the wealthiest, far the most populous, and far the most important. After 1 year of the war in 1703, the Grand Alliance was joined by 2 other powers, which at first had ranked themselves on the side of the French prince, Savoy and Portugal. Victor Amadeus II, Duke of Savoy, is one of the most romantic characters of the period. Though his territory was small, the part that he played in history was by no means insignificant. He had more than ordinary capacity, both as general and administrator. The virtues of chivalry, bravery, and generosity distinguished him, and made him warmly loved by his subjects. When a French emissary was taunting him with the destruction of his small army, he answered with spirit, "I will stamp with my foot upon the ground, and soldiers will spring forth." His little land was overshadowed by its more powerful neighbour, and had for at least half a century before his accession been at the beck of the French king. Louis sent orders to the Duke not to harbour Protestants who had fled from France when the Edict of Nantes was revoked, and to persecute those who were in his dominion. Had not his predecessor done it in Cromwell's time, and stirred Milton's heart with the tales of atrocity that were told? Victor Amadeus was but half-hearted in the execution of Louis's cruel will, and a French marshal was sent to demand his capital. This drove him into open resistance, and he joined the League of Augsburg in 1686, which had been recently set on foot. The armies sent against him were active and powerful, and he lost 2 battles. But great efforts were made to detach him from the common cause, and at length he made a separate peace with France, which was as honourable to him as if he had been victorious. His territory was to be restored. The Duke of Burgundy, the eldest son of the Dauphin, was to marry his eldest daughter. He was to be treated like a king. On these terms he changed sides. It was said that he was generalissimo for the Emperor and for King Louis within 1 month. But his separate peace was the first of a series, and the Treaty of Ryswick 1697, soon ended the war. When the Second Grand Alliance was formed, and the War of the Spanish Succession began, he was at first on the side of the French, but after a very short time he made a change, as sudden as that which he had made in the last war, but in the exactly opposite direction. In order to secure his alliance, not only had the Duke of Burgundy married his eldest daughter, in accordance with the treaty, but his brother Philip, Duke of Anjou, and now, according to the will of the late king, King of Spain, married his second daughter. The insolence, however, of a French marshal, who apparently despised a Prince of Savoy, and the strictness of Spanish etiquette, which would not allow him to sit by the side of his son-in-law, so vexed him that he meditated deserting his cause. All hesitation was removed by an arrogant letter which he received from Louis XIV. The following was their correspondence. The King to the Duke. Monsieur, since religion, honour, and your own signature are of no account between us, I send my cousin, the Duc de Vendôme, to explain my will to you. He will give you 24 hours to decide. Answer, the Duke to the King. Sire, threats do not frighten me. I shall take the measures that may suit me best, relative to the unworthy proceedings that have been adopted toward my troops. I have nothing further to explain, and I decline listening to any proposition whatsoever. Louis XIV. Sent orders that the Savoyard troops should be disarmed. Victor Amadeus thereupon changed sides, and was for the remainder of the war bitterly opposed to France. At first he met with many disasters, but his high courage sustained him through them all, and when Eugene brought an imperial army into Italy, the tide of war turned, and the success of the Allies in that portion of the borders of France was by no means the least serious of the blows under which King Louis staggered. This sketch, which is continued in the main body of the history, may be found of interest, placed side by side with the account of the kingdom of Prussia. As that is the beginning of the modern German Empire, so the descendant of Victor Amadeus is now King of United Italy. The Duchy of Savoy may be said to be the germ of modern Italy, though, strange to say, it now lies without the borders of that kingdom. Portugal joined the Grand Alliance in the same year as Savoy. During the Middle Ages, Portugal had been a small independent kingdom, which during the latter part of that time had devoted itself to the honourable work of discovery and colonization. On a vacancy of the throne occurring by exhaustion of the previous dynasty, Philip II. Of Spain became a candidate, but being doubtful of success, he determined not to wait for an election, but to seize the crown by force of arms. For 60 years Portugal remained subject to Spain, and for rather more than 60 years since it had been free. In this war the situation of Portugal gave it an importance which its size could not claim. The king hesitated at first on which side to declare, thinking that France would win, but recognizing also that the fleets of England and Holland were strong, and that his coasts lay exposed to them. To secure Portugal, the Archduke Charles promised by a secret treaty to cede certain Spanish cities, and the territory called Rio de la Plata in South America. When this was afterwards divulged, it created a strong feeling against Charles in Spain. A treaty, called the Methuen Treaty, after Paul Methuen, the English ambassador at Lisbon, gained over Portugal to the side of the Allies. One of the conditions of this treaty was that the wines of Portugal should be admitted into England at a much lower duty than the French wines. Such was the price of the accession of Portugal, a price which the English continued to pay for no less than 131 years. The alliance between England and Portugal was permanent. Against this league what chance had the French? The confederacy was very numerous, but no reliance can be placed on the members of a confederacy that they will remain of one mind. France was a monarchy, and a despotic monarchy. It suffered from no divided councils, but one will ruled over all. Moreover, it had a large and well-disciplined standing army, and was probably able to bring at once into the field a larger force than the whole confederacy. And lastly, the French soldiers had hitherto been victorious on every field. They believed themselves, and others held them to be, almost invincible. An unprejudiced spectator at the outset would have said that France, with Spain on her side, would win in this contest. Such an one could not take into account the as yet unproved genius of Marlborough, or the lavish expenditure of money on the part of England and of Holland. In the same year that Savoy left her side, France gained another ally, the Elector of Bavaria. He had been Governor-General of the Netherlands during the reign of his wife's uncle, Charles II of Spain. It was a post with an enormous salary, and Brussels, the seat of the government, was a pleasant place of residence, pleasanter than his own capital, Munich. To secure his alliance, a promise was made by Louis that the Elector should be continued in this post, and so within a year of the outbreak he declared himself on the side of France. His brother, the Elector of Cologne, was a creature of King Louis, and of course upon his side, but his assistance was of no great value. At the beginning of the war, Philip, the French candidate, was aged 17, Charles, the Austrian Archduke, 15. They were curiously alike in character. Both were dreamy and sleepy in disposition, but capable of obstinate opposition when once aroused, and afterwards became mere puppets in the hands of their wives. Lord Peterborough, an English general, somewhat free of tongue, asked if it was worth while that great nations should fight for such a pair of louts. End of section 4.